I'm Dee Wilson from the University of Washington School of Social Work. I want to welcome you to this. This is a cooperative venture of the Foster Care Assessment Program at Harborview. Did I get that right?
So far, so good.
And Partners for Our Children and the Community Engagement Initiative at the School of Social Work. And today we have the privilege of hearing Lucy Berliner, who is the Director of the Sexual Assault Center at Harborview, and Byron Mannering, who's the Executive Director of Bridget Collins. Did I get that? Family Support Center in Bellingham, on the subject of parenting interventions. And just one comment here. An article a year or two ago, Rick Barth commented that 400,000 parents a year in the child welfare system are being referred for parenting programs and education of various sorts. So today we're going to hear at some length from people who really know a lot about this, about what's the evidence base for those programs. So I'm going to turn this over to Lucy.
Byron and I today are going to talk about the parenting intervention in the child welfare system, and I'm going to talk about sort of what we know about and parenting interventions, and somewhat my own point of view about what would be a useful way to think about parenting interventions in the child welfare system. And one of the points that won't surprise you to hear is that the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all to the solution of child welfare families, which is a little bit, unfortunately, kind of what we have now, which is this sort of boilerplate service plan where almost everybody gets a laundry list of the same kinds of things, that we aren't going to take the position that that's the best way to serve these families, nor the best way to use our resources. So, first of all, in talking about parenting in the child welfare system, the more I was thinking about it and preparing for this talk, it's sort of like, well, what else is there? I mean, fundamentally, the reason why the government is authorized to get involved in family lives through the child welfare system is essentially because of a problem of parenting. In other words, the parents are either doing things to children that are not allowed, like physically and sexually abusing them, which would be child abuse, or they're failing to do things that parents are required and expected to do with their children, or acts of omission, like as in neglect, not supervising them, not taking care of their needs. So ultimately, it really is fundamentally all about a problem in parenting. Now, the goals for the child welfare system in a family where a case has been open, in other words, the government's involved in people's lives and kind of telling them what to do, well, they're pretty straightforward, and they relate directly, of course, to the reasons why the government is justified in getting involved, which is we want to see people increase their monitoring and supervision of their children. And we tend in the child welfare system to think of this primarily in terms of little kids, where parents might be leaving little kids to fend for themselves and that sort of thing. But the idea of appropriate parental monitoring and supervision, of course, if you look over in the juvenile justice system, one of the main targets for the effective interventions or evidence-based interventions in terms of reducing delinquency or recidivism is improving parental monitoring and supervision of delinquent teenagers. So the idea of appropriate parental monitoring and supervision, paying attention to your kids, knowing where they are, knowing who they're with, is a very important function of parenting. And when it goes wrong, you can have the problem we care about with little kids, where they can get hurt or something bad can happen to them because nobody's watching them, or with older kids where they're getting into trouble in situations where they're exposed to people who are going to draw them further into a delinquent lifestyle and at risk to both hurt themselves or other people. Obviously, one goal is you got to do whatever it's going to take to keep people from physically and sexually abusing their children in the future if they have already done that. And the stats are pretty darn good in both areas. If people get interventions that actually are evidence-based, we have some reason to believe would target those behaviors. I mean, the recidivism rates are not that high with effective interventions. And a good example in the parenting area that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, an intervention everybody here is probably familiar with and is a parenting intervention, and that's PCIT, parent-child interaction therapy. I mean, that is the single best proven intervention for child welfare that we have. You can reduce the re-referral rates to child welfare from 50% to 20% with a 16-week intervention. That's all there is. How about that? You know, I mean, that's fantastic. We have nothing like that anywhere else yet. We may get there, but so that's pretty good odds. And those re-referrals are not all for physical abuse, but many of them are actually for neglect. So promoting a positive parent-child bond, well, there's, you know, obviously that's just an inherently good thing to do, but it's also a huge protective factor for a lot of other things. For example, parents and kids who are close, kids actually want to be good when they feel close to their parents. You know, they're more motivated to not misbehave or to get in trouble. Kids who are not misbehaving are less at risk to be physically abused. So these are all key goals of the child welfare system, and the good news is we have parenting programs that can help with every one of these things and help substantially. So we would want to be doing that. Now, one of the things, of course, that comes up in the child welfare system, and this is going back to the laundry list service plan approach, which is, of course, there are a lot of factors that tend to be present and probably are contributing to parents abusing or neglecting their kids. And this is just the standard list that everybody is familiar with. And of course it's possible, and it tends to be what we do, which is to try to target all those things too, which is sort of, you know, trying to get everyone, do a little bit of something about all of these things on the idea that if you do that, you will eliminate the child abuse and neglect problem or substantially reduce it. And that may be true, but it is important to keep in mind in terms of thinking about the most efficient and effective use of our resources is these are not directly targeting parenting deficits, are they? These are targeting other problems that in this case, we believe, interfered with their parenting ability. But let's face it, you know, is it the child welfare system's job to eliminate, you know, substance abuse in our society or, you know, take responsibility for curing people's mental health problems? I mean, the reality is lots of people raise kids pretty darn well, even if they do have a substance abuse problem or they have a mental health problem. And talk about trouble finding effective interventions. Once you're starting to try to think about, now I need 5 different targets for which I need an evidence-based intervention available in my community to send this poor person to, so that they don't have any, we want to make sure they don't have any actual time that's not spent on fulfilling their service plan. And in case I'm being the slightest bit, you know, non-obvious about this business of long lists of interventions is something that I think comes more from our desire to try to find a solution for every problem than any evidence that more is better. In fact, the evidence is kind of accumulating that less is better, that when people are given multiple strategies and places they have to go, they're not really concentrating on any, it's not the going. I guess that's the point. It's not what going to a class that has anything to do with anything. It's what you do in between the classes that counts. The new way of thinking, the new skill you use. So my thought is maybe we ought to pay a lot more attention to focusing on the actual thing that's caused the problem that got child welfare involved, which is a problem in the parenting itself. And we know what the kinds of problems are that tend to be associated with child abuse and neglect. We do know that having beliefs and ideas about your child, about child rearing, approaches, so attitudes that are the kind of thing that are can be targeted through interventions that help people change their thinking and their beliefs are highly correlated with abuse and neglect. Parents who tend to see their kids as an adversary or who don't appreciate you know, how important the positive part of parenting is, or they have a strong commitment to punishment, physical punishment, and authoritarian parenting styles. The idea that my way or the highway is how you conceptualize the relationship and parenting. So those are all attitudes and beliefs, and cognitive approaches are obviously going to be the cure in that situation. If you want to get people to think in a better way, you got to target their thinking. Another area, and this is something that in my thinking about all these programs I noticed was kind of missing. So Sue, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about this, which is, a lot of child abuse situations, physical abuse ones in particular, you've got another component that's not often in these standard parenting interventions, which is handling negative affect. So there's only one that I'm going to talk about that directly targets that a parent's mad, and calming down is really helpful, and putting a break between you and hitting your kid. And then, of course, there's the skills, what you do in response to kid behavior. And so if you are a CBT person like I am, a cognitive behavioral person, you can just see what I've talked about, which are cognitions, emotions, and behaviors, and the gist of that theoretical approach to understanding behavior is they're interconnected, and that when you are intervening in a clinical arena, you want to target one or more of those in a highly structured, specific way. Now, there are effective parenting interventions are basically in a family that is generally referred to as parent management training or something along those lines. They are essentially all variations on a theme. And they're all kind of based on the same theoretical model, mostly behavioral, or if you're thinking CBT, the B is the biggest target. But to some extent, they're also addressing cognitions, because anytime you give info, like psychoeducation, information about, how behavior problems develop, or what's appropriate for children. What's the point of giving that information? Is to change people's beliefs. So it's a cognitive strategy. So almost all of these parenting interventions, even though they might focus the bulk of their work on teaching people skills or new behaviors, almost all of them are in one way or another addressing cognitions, because they're giving information designed to change how people think and view things. They're all based on just well-known, well-established principles of behavior change that, certain things make behavior more likely to happen and certain other responses make it less likely to happen. And all of them target the parent or caregiver or environment. The environment is the key to improve, dealing with the child behavior part of it. And in terms of when it's a parent who you're trying to enhance it, they have to be the primary recipient of the intervention. There is literally, when the presenting concern is child behavior problems, there is no treatment that involves the kid, because I've never yet had a kid who hadn't been already told, don't do that. And if that worked, they wouldn't be in my office. The reason they're still doing it is because it's working for them. That's pretty much all there is to it. So some of these interventions are fully parent-mediated. I mean, they don't involve the kids at all. And some of them involve the kids in some parts of it or to some extent. Now, if you really want to get the whole dang thing down, don't shoot the dog. Because everyone ought to have that sitting by your bedside, because there's nobody who hasn't wished that someone around them would change, or somebody would pick up their socks, or take the garbage out. So basic principles. If behavior is persisting, there's a reason for it. And that's because it's either getting something somebody wants, or it's getting them out of something they don't want. That's why we would routinely in a therapy environment do a functional behavioral analysis. When somebody's coming in and beefing about a behavior, it'll always be possible to figure out whether it's the child or whether it's the parent. And we all deal with parents who come in and are sort of doing things that we don't think are all that helpful, and you got to stop and wonder, well, why is that? What is making it possible for that to keep on going? Because it doesn't happen for no reason. So behavior changes based on what's reinforced, whether it's positive or negative. And as a rule that everybody knows, of course, from college, it's got to be consistent, because that intermittent reinforcement thing is a real killer unless you happen to be running a casino in Las Vegas, and really it's your lifeblood. If I just pull that thing one more time, maybe. And then something that on a technical level we always want to help parents be aware of when you're trying to teach a new parenting skill is that when the rules change and all of a sudden something that got them something they wanted before or got them out of something they didn't want to do, and the parents trying to be firm, you're going to just see a little burst of trying harder to see if the old way still works. And then another principle that you'll see is throughout every one of these interventions, it's the positive that counts the most. Now, most of you, I know Byron, I'm sure you guys run across some people want to, when they're interested in engaging in a parenting class, what are the first thing they want? They want you to tell them how to make the kid be good. In other words, they want the discipline side of things. And all these interventions try to reorient people towards promoting and enhancing and increasing the amount of positivity going on in a family, because that's what has a bigger bang than learning how to do time out correctly. So positive reinforcement is where the influence is. Now, pretty much every one of these interventions is going to have some element of it that is devoted to encouraging parents to spend positive time with kids as a way to promote the parent-child relationship and improve behavior. If you're in PCIT, what's it called? Special playtime. If you're doing Barclay's model, what's it called? One-on-one time. But it's the same basic idea, and they're, in the sense that the idea that if kids and parents are spending child-directed time together, where it's not the parent giving instructions or turning it into an educational experience. When I was trying to help this parent over the summer to, she had a conflicted relationship with her daughter, and I was saying I could help her make that less that way, less arguing, less not doing what she's told, et cetera. And I started with how about you build in, some positive one-on-one time? And that's something your daughter really wants to do, and you're just spending time with her positively. And she said, well, when I make her go kayaking, I think that's a good example. And I said, right there, that make thing, that's kind of missing the point. She said, yeah, but by the end of it, she's usually okay. So helping parents see that something that's a good for them experience or something that's educational or it's accomplishing something, that's not the point of this. This is hanging, and following the lead, and where there's not that going on. There'll always be a component that addresses the key thing of selective attention, which basically the things you pay attention to, you'll get more of. And so you're always going to be trying to teach parents to pay attention to positive behavior or stuff they want to see more of. And this, as everyone knows, is sometimes kind of a hassle, because a lot of people's values, family values, traditional values, cultural values, you don't actually praise people for doing what they're supposed to do. So this is a problem that can sometimes be a barrier in certain interventions like PCIT, which basically puts a huge premium on teaching parents and rating them on how much praising they do. Then there's usually a component that teaches how to give effective instructions. So if you want to get a kid to do something, there are ways that work better than others to get the kid to do it. Like, don't tell them to do 2 or 3 times. Don't tell a kid to, when they're at the last 5 minutes of their favorite TV show, that now's the moment they have to take the garbage out, or giving them an opportunity to comply. There are just a few things like that, and all these interventions will sort of teach that skill. And then the consequences for misbehavior, the discipline side of it, is always going to be an element. And the standard ones are just the ones everybody knows: timeout, rewards and consequences, contracts, charting, all those kind of things. All of these programs are going to have, almost without exception, these elements in them. So I want to just talk a little bit about the package factor. So we have all these all these packages that have now been developed, and they have brand names on them. And sometimes it seems like you just have a laundry list of alphabet soup that is starting to be sort of confusing. Am I for this one or am I for that one? And kind of the whole entire point of my talk, besides the part about let's focus on parenting as the primary service plan component, is that it's important that we understand these are all variations on a theme, that they're not kind of completely different things. They're packages and branding of a basic theory and a set of components, and that the more we get that, I think the better we are going to making decisions around individual families. So here's some brand names that are becoming increasingly familiar to people, because our state is way out there on the idea that let's get evidence-based, and I'm sure these are, for the most part, brand names that everybody's kind of heard something about one way or another. And I wanted to throw in multidimensional treatment foster care, because essentially that's what it is. It is a parent management intervention in which the foster home, the treatment foster home, becomes the therapeutic milieu. But in effect, what makes it work is that you've got the foster parents and the consultants working together to create what? A behavior management plan for that kid, and then the consultants and the team is providing support and reinforcement to the foster parents to carry out the behavior management plan. So it is just way down at the other end of intensiveness from a group type intervention that maybe at the other end, but it's essentially same principles. Different delivery method, probably different packaging, but ultimately it's just a variation on that same theme. So, PCIT. Everybody knows about PCIT because we have quite a bit of that in our state, and it's really caught on. And one of the reasons I think PCIT has caught on so much in child welfare is because of its very strong emphasis on promoting and enhancing the parent-child relationship. And because that is more likely to be compromised because of attachment insecurity or the history of child abuse and neglect, I think those of us in child welfare, we're not just interested in parents having a little toolkit of ways to appropriately discipline their children. We want to promote a positive relationship and maybe repair some of this other stuff. And since PCIT, basically, as you know, it starts with, it's all done through coaching, but it's all about enhancing the relationship before you move at all to the discipline side. Now, the evidence for PCIT, it's probably the strongest of all of these interventions for use with child welfare system people. So it's fully parent mediated. There's no interaction really between the therapist and the child in this case, but that makes quite a bit of sense because it's really designed for little kids. So there is no reason in a parenting intervention that a child needs to have some special relationship with some counselor. It really, the parent, and it's a very empowering intervention because of its focus on the parent. I think it's an excellent one to use in DV, because a lot of mothers in DV situations have had their role as a parent really drastically undermined by the battering, and so they may be depressed or ineffective or inconsistent. And of course, as we know, DV, battered women are at some risk to be physically abusive to their own children, perhaps because of deficiencies in their parenting skills. And an intervention that's really all about empowering the parent is probably really a good match, I think, in that kind of situation. Triple P, that's another program that's coming on in our state. The CA has an interest in it. And in terms of the evidence with child welfare, they have a study, they have a lot of studies showing that it reduces behavior problems, but they have an incredibly interesting study that is in press now, and in which, and I believe it was funded by the CDC, and counties in the South were randomized to one to be the intervention site, and the other, and matched counties that would be the control site. And what they did basically was train a lot of people in different contexts within the experimental counties. So people who might deliver parenting stuff in a whole lot of places. in clinics and in parenting programs, et cetera, and hundreds of them in these communities. And then they compared their child abuse reporting rates, and it was just unbelievable. The rates of child abuse were down by something like a quarter, the presentation I saw in the counties where they had a lot of trained people. So it's a population-based study, which is different than most studies in our field. So they weren't looking at individual people who got triple P, but at a community where lots of people that parents might encounter with parenting problems were getting exposed to an evidence-based approach to parenting. They also had reductions in placement rates and reductions in injuries seen in emergency departments. So this is a very exciting and new approach, the population-based approach, rather than focusing on individual people getting the whole thing. But what if everywhere people went to get help with a parenting problem, they were getting the same principles and learning the same skills? So your whole community's level of parenting competence changes. So this is, again, parent-mediated. It applies to all ages, so little kids all the way up to teenagers. I think one of the very attractive features of Triple P is that they have all these different levels of it available. So you can get the general kind of community ed awareness level. You can get a more brief, focused level for families with a relatively circumscribed problem. They only might need 3 or 4 sessions. They're more intensive, both group and intervention. So it's really quite a nice little stepped care kind of a model. The Incredible Years, that's another intervention, and of course our very own Dr. Carolyn Webster Stratton here at the UW is the inventor and disseminator, and like Triple P, The Incredible Years is a worldwide phenom, and there are entire countries that are TI-wide at this point. I think in Scandinavia there's been a huge amount of adoption. And the Incredible Years, again, same elements, same basic components. To my knowledge, The Incredible Years has not yet been specifically tested and reported on with child welfare, but it's been heavily studied with samples that are very likely to include child welfare, like Head Start. So it's not like it was tested with a bunch of sort of middle-class, everyday people, and it works for them. And it is being currently tested with, more specifically, with the child welfare population. The Barkley model is being used as part of a major important research study funded by the MacArthur Foundation to look at a more matching up modules approach to treatment of kids with problems, as opposed to the delivering a particular package, not matching it, but the part of that, and they address anxiety, depression, and behavior problems, and conduct problems. They use the Barkley model to do it. That's one-on-one time, by the way. So these are, well-developed, tested, proven, likely to work, just different names, different packages. Now this is the one that I was mentioning earlier that has the component that addresses directly negative affect in the parents. And this is a model that was tested by David Kolko, and he's now carrying out an effectiveness study where he's trying it out in the community in Pittsburgh. And this is a model for physical abuse, where the parent has physically abused the kid and the kid's still living with them. And as well, he is about to embark on looking at its use in domestic violence situations where the batter is going to stay involved with the kids. But it targets both the children and the adults. And it's for a little bit older, like 7 or 8-ish, but the kids receive part of the intervention, the adults receive part of it. A lot of it is parallel, and they include this dealing with emotion dysregulation or emotional distress as a key element. And there's quite a bit of emphasis on changing beliefs and attitudes about violence in the home. But again, it's a very skill teaching oriented model. So my take-home message is on this, that all of these programs are based on the same theory and have the same elements, and the key thing, of course, is the focus on teaching people to do something different and emphasizing skills. And of course, any good program like this is going to use some kind of measurement. So how do you know when something's better if you haven't measured something before and as you go along? And that's an inherent element of PCIT, for example, where parents complete a behavior form every single time they come. And they can actually see over the course of their involvement in therapy how their reports of behavior problems in their kids are going down. And let me tell you that parents like that. You know, it's actually quite meaningful for people to see a graph as opposed to just say, well, I kind of think things are better. So for delivery service implications, well, there's a lot of things that could work. The package and the brand name really should not be what we get bogged down on, because we really got a fabulous menu of possibilities here, and really going head to head. I really doubt that any one of these is going to be the one that solves all our problems. They're all good. They can all work. They are probably great to have as part of the armamentarium. It's really what people are doing that matters, not what it's called. And so when you get away from the brand names, and when you get a brand name, you know what it is. When you get away from a brand name, basically you can decide whether or not you think it's an effective parenting intervention by finding out, well, what actually happens in it? What are the elements of it? You know what they are. So finding out if somebody says, I'm doing parenting for child abuse cases, well, what actually is it? Does it involve teaching skills, and if so, how? What are the components? That'll tell the tale about whether you can have confidence this intervention is going to make any difference. The advantage of a brand name is you know it can make a difference. The probability is there. Some people don't need, a huge, long, full-on course of individual parenting. Some people really actually benefit by a brief, focused intervention for a specific problem. So having a stepped care model seems to me is just absolutely critical to having a really good child welfare response to parenting problems. Now, my last point is, of course, knowing what will help people is really becoming less and less of the issue in therapy. I mean, we know what will help people with many problems. They're not guarantees or full-on cures for everything, but we actually know quite a bit. You got a depression, we know what it will do. You got anxiety, you got post-traumatic stress, you have bipolar, and I mean the real kind, not the one everybody has. You have schizophrenia. We know tons. What our biggest problem really is not what's going to help people. It's actually getting people to getting the services that will really help people to be available in an accessible way, and it's figuring out how to get people to go to them. And because, as I am fond of saying, and I'm just going to repeat myself, antibiotics, nobody goes around questioning whether antibiotics work. But, they only actually work if you pick up the pill and put it in your mouth. So that people have to do something different than what they were doing for any clinical intervention to make any difference at all. And being willing to change to, where the status quo stops being just as good as the desire to change. And that is a whole different issue than whether there's a treatment that works. That's a whole separate issue. That's an issue of motivation and engagement. And we luckily have good interventions that address both engagement and motivation, but those involve different skills. I can tell you right now, it does not involve trying to talk people into why this is really great and it'll really work, and let me show you a bunch of studies. And so Byron and the CA in our state has gotten on board with the idea that these motivational interviewing skills are a critical component of moving people who are ambivalent towards engagement in a change process, because that's what therapy is. It's a change process. And change means doing something different than the way you're doing it now. Byron.
I guess one of the things I wanted to really say at the start here is, like, yesterday, one of our my program director, Catherine Lyons, came into my office, and she sat down. She said, "Byron, I've just been down in the PCIT clinic. I've just been down in the clinic." And, it almost made me cry. Because, you have to imagine what our clinic is like down in where we do the PCIT work. It's this really kind of child-friendly area. They have, pictures of flowers on the walls and stuff like that. But it also really has a lot of techie stuff in it too, it's got all the equipment, things like that, so it's kind of a cool place to be. But she said, we have the best PCIT coaches that you could ever imagine. I mean, she said it is just inspirational to see how strong they are and how well they do their work and how focused they are. And she said, I was just watching them, and they're clear and they're concise, and they've built these great relationships with the parents. And also, she said, and then outside of the clinic was the case manager that's working with the mom. And she's out there with the siblings of the child, reinforcing some of the same kinds of parenting skills that are going on in there. And she said it just felt like home. It just felt like a really wonderful, experience. And and I heard that, and I go, God, man, I can get behind that. I, as the executive director, that makes me want to go out and raise money so we can do more of this, because I know it's making a difference. But also, later, when I realized what had happened was that this child also had just been in our front office in the reception area screaming his lungs out. I mean, he was having the biggest tantrum, and our office receptionist, she was just so cute. She's like, I could just barely hear anybody on the phone talking, but they actually did PCIT right there in the front office, because they were ignoring his behavior. The mom and the coach went outside, and the child did their tantrum, and then they went down and they started their practice. I guess, the point I want to make with this is that it's not just one person doing the work, it's the entire environment, it's the entire organization, and that all the people that were involved, from the coach to my receptionist, who was okay with letting the child do their tantrum there because she knew that was part of the strategy for how to do it. All of them involved in that make a difference in terms of how to really get the practice going in the first place. What I'm going to talk about here today mostly is really how to create competence in evidence-based practices, and how do we actually, as an organization, truly embrace these evidence-based practices models and make them work. I also am going to talk about how to determine what evidence-based practice is the best match for the family. We have all of these that Lucy was talking about, but how do you decide, who decides which is the best one to use for which family? And then how do you offer or deliver evidence-based practices as a part of a package of effective treatment package, and how do you combine them with other types of services that might work? Just to get started, my agency is it's the example that we're going to use. It's the Bridget Collins Family Support Center. Well, it's a private nonprofit 501c3 organization, started out in 1990. We actually just opened up an office in Skagit County, so that's brand new, and we're doing the same. It's the same kind of model is being developed and coming out of that local community too. Although there are some nuances of how that's happening, but we're pretty excited about offering these same services down there as well. But our mission is to break the cycle of child abuse. And it's by, our strategy is to prevent the onset of abuse from happening in the first place. And then when abuse does happen, how do we provide treatment and support so it doesn't happen again? So if we do those two things, we're going to reduce the number of kids that are actually potential abuse victims in our community. So that's been our strategy. And so as we've been doing that over a period of years, we've developed out what we like to call a menu of services. So when families come into our program, we can look at them. And part of what we do as the agency is we use community resources to fill in gaps where state dollars or other types of dollars don't fit. So, when families walk in the door or when families give us a call, we have a blank sheet of paper. What's going on? What do you need? And then we say we have all these different types of services. And again, we're looking at services on the prevention side and services on the treatment side in terms of how we provide for them. Intangible, like when we look at it from a provider services, these are the names. We don't really call these, when we talk to our families, we don't say, oh, you're going to get the Parent Trust for Washington's Children program. We just talk about it in more terms of a support group, a mutual self-help support group for families. But these are the types of services that we provide that fit within the range of evidence-based practices or best practices and what we've been doing. And you can see we started out back in 1995, and And then, of course, really started getting involved in the year 2000. Lucy was one of our first ones with the foster care assessment program. I'll never forget that call when Lucy called me up and said, "Byron, have I got a project for you?" And engaged us in the foster care assessment program, and it was really quite exciting. And that. But what I really want to focus in on is the work that we've been doing most recently in terms of these more recent parenting skills building evidence-based practices. We have the Parent-Child Interaction Therapy program. Right now we have 5 coaches doing 53 families. Now, I think that's probably one of the highest in the state in terms of the number of people that are involved in working that program. The Incredible Years program, we have 5 different providers that have been trained in that, and we'll be offering 4 groups this year. We actually started our first group in Skagit County this time, so that'll be about 30 to 40 families working in that program. The Positive Parenting program, PPP, we currently have 3 providers trained in levels 4 and 5, and they're actually doing 2 to 3 families each right now because we don't have a contract for those services yet, but we want to keep them involved in working that. But the contract that we do have is to go ahead and train an additional 20 people in levels 2 and 3 PPP and do some additional training in levels 4 and 5 as well. And then we have most of our staff, 19 different providers trained in motivational interviewing. And so that's kind of the scope of what we've been working towards in terms of building the sense of organizational capacity to actually handle these programs and get used to it, to providing evidence-based practices. You know, when we look at how do you do this as an organization, I see there's kind of 5 different main areas to focus in on. One is, your staff. How does your staff, respond to these programs? The training issues that are related to evidence-based practices, supervision issues, quality assurance, and then culture. And, our staff, they love this evidence-based practice. They love our commitment to it. And they literally walk around with smiles on their faces and woo-hoos, whenever they have success. Incredible Years, we had, for some reason, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but they had numbers of attrition, and they went out and they just went forward using all of their motivational interviewing skills that they could use to bring up the numbers again so that we could continue to provide this particular service. Again, the emails go out and the comments go out. They're constantly celebrating the successes of their work with the families, and as a result, that reinforces their commitment to do more. When they see that success, it just is a constant reinforcement to do a better job, to be more focused on their practice and maintaining fidelity. Now, when we started doing this, getting the right staff in the position is really kind of an important thing because for those of you who have been providing evidence-based practices, the amount of commitment that your agency has to make, the amount of money and resources and dedication to one particular provider is huge. It is a major step that your organization takes. So you want to make sure that you get the right person who's actually going to be able to provide that service. And PCIT was the first one we were working with on that, and we were trying to say, okay, what kind of a provider, what kind of a social services provider really would make a good PCIT coach? Well, we first started thinking, well, let's see, what kind of games might they like to play? What kind of, is somebody who's a chess player a really good, PCIT coach, or is a better PCIT coach somebody who plays checkers? That kind of thing. We started thinking about that, but we started looking more and more at what this means, and and when you're hiring and when you're selecting or actually choosing whether you want to do this or not, you have to keep in mind certain things. One, this is a very, very structured behavioral intervention. All of these practices are. So, psychotherapists typically aren't really, quite suited for this, because it's a specific way that you're going to do business. We look for people who look at the world in this from a systematic perspective. They look at it from a systematic framework, and also those that are comfortable in the world, that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do that. I'm not saying that that's the only way they look at the world, but they really feel comfortable in that world where, where they teach a specific thing, and they're really comfortable in saying, nope, it's this way, you do it this way. And I would make a terrible PCIT coach because but there are folks out there that really do that. Those with a scientific background, like nurses. I think DD providers would be really good in this particular thing because there's a pretty structured approach in terms of teaching and working with individuals with developmental disabilities. And I think teachers are good prospects. Also, case management experience, I think, is really helpful in providers of the evidence-based practices, but not if that's their first love. I mean, case management experience helps you understand where your boundaries are and what you can do, but if you get sucked in as a provider into all the various different needs and concerns that the family has in relationship to their overall family management skills and what's going on in their life, you'll never get to and stay focused on those primary responsibilities of the PCIT program or any of those other programs. So not their first love, but having some experience with case management is important. Training, evidence-based practices, there's a lot of training that goes into these programs. And so when you're really thinking of your evidence-based practice in terms of is your agency, is your organization really okay with moving forward with the training and focusing your resources on that thing, on these programs? We have actually found that it really is helpful because it really does focus the specific training that a particular individual needs in order to intervene and do their job. Whereas in general, 2 or 3 years ago, we were saying, staff would become, I want to do this training, I want to do that training, I want to do this training, I want to do that training. Well, did it ever really, how much did it improve their actual practice and their skill building? So having these evidence-based practices, systematic training really does help target what they're getting and how you're committing your resources to that. Also, supervisors. It's really important, I think, that supervisors be trained in the evidence-based practice because drift is a common issue that goes on with providing these services and how to do that. And if the supervisors don't get it, they're not really likely to catch drift. And more importantly, they're not really likely to address drift. Because, we have that a lot within the providers in the community. The contractors typically are not catching the drift or addressing the drift, they're doing a little bit of it, but it's mostly the supervisor in their particular role in working with that provider that are going to catch it and address it. Also, I think this whole kind of concept of systematic approaches, if you have a systematic approach to training, then it relates to a systematic approach in terms of how you apply the practice and the skills that you're doing. So that whole kind of systematic concept going on over and over. And then again, also start serving, providers who are trained, they need to start serving immediately after they get trained. Now that's hard to do because, especially in our state right now, as these evidence-based practices are just coming out and new contracts are being written. Our PPP contract, we got it 6 months ago, but it's not signed yet. Children's Administration put on a big training. We went and got trained 6 months ago, but there's no contract or setup to provide the service yet. So what we've made a commitment is okay, well, we're going to keep ourselves in our practice immediately because if we don't start doing it right away, you're going to lose it very, very fast. Also, I think it's important that you orient and get your entire staff familiar with what these practices are, because they will reinforce those particular practices that you have with evidence-based practices. And if you're like our organization, you may have a family that is involved with 2 or 3 different people within your agency, and you want to make sure everybody's consistent in terms of the message and what they're giving their particular families. Supervision, again, like I said before, drift begins as soon as the individual leaves training. I think that supervisor's skill is really key to transforming the provider's knowledge into actual skill. It's really just like what Lucy was saying. When we send parents to class, parenting education class, They get this cognitive, awareness about what to do. They learn these particular things. It becomes kind of part of their knowledge base. But when they go home, they try to put it into practice, and maybe it works a little bit. The next time, it doesn't work, and then they forget about it. And it's because it hasn't been integrated into their actual practice. And so I think that's really an important, so that's what these evidence-based practices do. They give them a systematic, ongoing practice with actually applying these programs or these skills. And that's what the supervision component does too. It continues to reinforce that skill development over a period of time, and not just saying, oh, you went to training, now you're a great PCIT coach or triple P provider. There is, actually just some early work happening in terms of how supervisors are trained to actually supervise and be good supervisors. And a couple of those we have, and one of those is like a motivational interviewing assessment supervisory tools for enhancing proficiency. Our supervisor, Catherine Lyons, who does a great job with all of this, has been to that training. And so now she is learning how to be a good supervisor to actual providers of motivational interviewing. And again, we've made that kind of commitment to make that happen. The other thing is we're involved with this technology to augment the effectiveness of providers through the University of Oklahoma and Harborview. And really what it is that we have with our PCIT coach, we have a coach in Oklahoma who's watching our coach via Polycom and coaching the coach as they're coaching the parent. And so that's just actually because they're aware of the fact that supervision, that ability to continue to provide support for our coaches is critical to getting programs going and having that kind of success. And then I guess I think training and creating a model fidelity culture, the training piece around that really does help improve with clarity and goals. For the supervisors, the supervisors know what they are training towards, and they know what to look for in particular families. And it really makes, having that level of competency within your staff makes supervision so much easier. There are lots of things around quality assurance that we've put into a quality assurance package. One of the things is this. Lucy mentioned there's a leadership team, PCIT leadership team in Washington State. We're looking at practices, and we're looking at how this is applied throughout the state, how the quality assurances and the trainings and pieces go into that. She mentioned also the triple P leadership team that we have pulled together as well. Again, these are looking at not necessarily the practices itself as much as how it's applied and how it's implemented in our state and what kind of strategies to do. But internally, the commitment to quality assurance is really important. And we've actually have a quality assurance position who's doing this. And I just kind of wanted to give an example of this, if I can get this. Yeah, there it is. This is a tool. Now, this tool goes on for 6 pages, but it's a tool for identifying what needs to happen. This is with the PCIT Home Visitor program that we have with the Commission on Children and Families has supported our work in fidelity and delivery of services for PCIT. But what you can see is that we've identified different program elements. What are the indicators of that particular element? So, for instance, thorough assessment of the family's readiness for PCIT. That's an important thing. Is this family really ready to start this program? And so, what are our indicators for that? Well, the PCIT coordinator will screen each family referred to PCIT for readiness using this new tool. So this tool goes on, so they're actually using this tool to do that screening process. And then the referrers will receive feedback on the readiness of the family. So this is, these are kind of like common sense types of things. But if you don't write them out, if you don't start looking at them and tracking them, they won't happen. You'll go, oh, I don't need to go through that step. and you'll miss things. The data sources. This assessment tool is the data source, and the PCIT coordination with refers. That coordination piece is how they're doing that. And then there's a section for frequency of data collection, and then the people that are responsible for it. So we go through all these different elements, all these different steps about how to apply this, how to really look at what the kind of the quality assurance factors that we know if we take all these steps will lead to success. So culture, if you do all of these things, a culture shift really does happen. I mean, it is a shift in culture. You got to surrender to it. I mean, it's a systematic approach. You just got to surrender to it. And once you do that, it's kind of like a higher power. Once you do that, it feels like everything kind of fits into place. A clear commitment and expectation to model fidelity is critical for everybody, administrators, supervisors, providers, and contractors. Contractors, how often do we have our contractors, they really don't know anything about the model that they're actually contracting for. So I think model fidelity has to happen within the contractor's awareness as well. And then I think all of that, and I truly do believe that all of that actually leads to a level of commitment within the families too. It transfers over because if you're doing the same thing, it's just like that example I gave earlier. Every step of the way from our office receptionist, the environment as a whole, to our programs, to our case managers, to me, and to our administrators, and to our funders. They all get behind it. Everybody gets supportive of it. And just an example of, I was with a group of funders giving a tour, and this little girl comes running down this ramp that we have towards this little play area. And this was about, I don't know, maybe 5:30 at night. And following behind her, was one of our moms. And, she was tired. It had been a long day. She'd just been through PCIT. You could tell, she was like this, because her little daughter's running away. She goes, and so she's running after her, and then she stops. She doesn't see anybody, all of us there, and she goes, Heather, you have two choices. and Heather goes, okay, Mommy, I'm coming. Boom. I mean, in that moment was just so powerful because not only did the mom, that had integrated into her, what she needed to do in that particular situation. Her behavior had changed from what she normally would do. And more importantly, the little girl, Heather, she wanted to please her mom. Those are two aspects of it. Now, the other thing is I have funders there, and they get really supportive of that concept. And then I go back and I tell our case manager, Carla, who's just fantastic, Carla Willis, I tell her about it. And the first thing she goes is, woohoo! Just the power of all of that culture. And that just reinforces, I'm going to do it again, I'm going to do it again, and we're going to do more and more and more of this, and we're going to keep applying and keep getting better at that. The other thing that Catherine Lyons wanted me to mention is that, what there is within the organization is a culture of catching the drift. You catch it, you make it happen, and you change it. It's an acceptable thing to do. We're looking for a drift, and we're trying to make that happen. So matching the family with the best evidence-based practice, what's the fit that we're looking for here? When we started looking at this, we had all these different evidence-based practices, and so the first thing when we started with motivational interviewing is we kind of looked at, okay, who gets motivational interviewing? Which family gets referred to motivational? And then we're thinking, wait a second, do you get referred to motivational interviewing? I don't think that's how that works. And so really kind of what we looked at, it was just, so I said, well, maybe motivational interviewing is really a technique. This is an evidence-based practice, but it's a technique that enhances our ability to provide the services, our practice skills. It enhances our skills and we get better at it. And then we started thinking, well, triple P, okay, we got these, short little, 1 session, 2 session, 3 session interventions. And we're thinking, okay, so somebody just gets, walks in our door and gets a level 2, or a one session, how does this work? How does that, kind of fit within our organizational structure in terms of how we deliver stuff? And so we kind of started looking at that as being like a flexible tool for enhancing the existing programs that we have. So we want to train all of our case managers, all of our family support workers in level 2 and 3. So that they're using similar, they have a tool bag, to use similar practices to address particular issues with the families. And then we have the standalone types of programs that really they can stand alone and be a part of, in and of themselves. PCIT, Incredible Years, and Triple P levels 4 and 5. They are kind of, they're longer term types of 12 to 16 session types of programs that are delivered for their families. So that's kind of how we started putting these things together when we were looking at our families. And then we thought, okay, well, we do have these things, and if we're looking at Triple P levels 4 and 5, and we're looking at Incredible Years and PCIT, how do we know which one of those might be? We have them all. Communities have them all. So how do you know which one? They all have similar kinds of constructs, or similar, kind of things that are underneath them, like what Lucy was saying. But they are slightly different. They do have different, kind of elements to it. So is there a way that we can know which one's best for which family? And that's when we started coming up with this particular tool. Again, all this stuff is really fairly new. I mean, it's all brand new in terms of what we're, kind of thinking about in terms of how we deliver this. But we decided, well, maybe we'll put together this a grid here in terms of looking at our programs. And so, we took PCIT and Incredible Years and Triple P and started looking at kind of what is it, the number of group sessions. And so, that's one thing. They're all fairly similar in nature, but then we look at like treatment model. PCIT is a one-on-one clinic model. Incredible Years is a closed group, and Triple P is a one-on-one combination. So what would those nuances mean in terms of relationship of how we would decide which family is best for which one of these programs? Well, we can look at a number of different things. The one-on-one things have a lot more flexibility in terms of, scheduling. So parents that, have demonstrated their ability to be, to be able to have transportation and get to places, the group model might work better for them or might work well for them. Whereas those that have a lot more trouble with scheduling, maybe more kids in the family and more kind of, challenges around, maybe the one-on-one is better. Although there's child care provided in the Incredible Years, so maybe that would be better for this particular family. So we're starting to look at what are the unique nuances about each particular family, in addition to what they need in terms of parenting skill building. What are the unique nuances that may make a difference for them? I think we're even looking in terms of just kind of parent preferences, and if a parent is like an introverted type of personality, well, groups are sometimes not too comfortable for them. Shouldn't we really look at the parent in terms of who they are, and don't you think that would help build their sense of a desire to be a part of this, be a part of a program, if they at least knew that you were saying, hey, here are these options, which one seems to fit your personality better? So we're kind of, looking at all those different types of things. And again, this list goes on. Reunification. This is another one. If these are services that are being provided for a parent who reunification is imminent, well, PCIT is, yes, it is if it's imminent. So, you have to, you should be within, 2 to 3 weeks of actually returning home before you want to use that particular one. Same with Incredible Years, within 2 weeks. But Triple P has more flexibility. So maybe Triple P is more appropriate for this particular family in relationship to where they are in their reunification plan or permanency plan. Neglect. PCIT really doesn't address neglect that much, right? But Incredible Years does. and Triple P does. So again, you can start looking at a variety of different situations, and that's how we're starting to do that. Anger problems. PCIT is not really there for anger problems, but Incredible Years and Triple P have those things. So I just wanted to give you a flavor for how we're kind of starting to use the information about the programs, about how we are making decisions on selecting them. Intervention, engagement, and assessment delivery. We want to clarify the specific reasons for the system. This is, now that we're starting to, have these tools about which one might work for them, it's like getting the families really engaged and hooked in with them. And so one of the very first things that we have to do, and I think is so important, especially when kids have been removed from the home or when a system is getting involved in we have to clarify why. Why is this, why did, CPS go and open this case? And why are they actually intervening? What is the particular reason that they're doing that? That is so important, and it's something that gets missed constantly. And so that's really the very first piece about how this works. The second piece is engaging the parent. It's that engagement piece. Once we know exactly why we are intervening in their lives, now we need to engage them and make them feel like we're there to help. And we're there to help support their correcting that problem or moving forward from there. Then to determine the unique parenting family characteristics, learning the styles and personalities and resources which match the best evidence-based practice. And then we want to know what's the best practices should be, and we want to know what's the best one that's available. Because we're going to start tracking this kind of information within our organization because we want to know, which one seems like would be the best fit, and then which one actually do we have available, because that might drive our decisions about how much resources we commit to one particular program or the other. And then the idea of delivering the evidence-based practice as a part of an integrated continuum of parenting skills building package and pointing that. So those are kind of the 4 steps that we're looking at in terms of how do we engage and work with the families. And so this is just a kind of an example. This is where we want to say who makes these decisions. Where are the decisions about which package the most important to be made? Right now, what happens typically is either a court says, I want you to do this, or, court commissioner says, I want this to happen for the family. They probably met the family, 10 minutes ago, and they're relying on the social worker who has probably talked to the parents in, maybe a couple of days, right? It doesn't have a lot of information. So that's kind of what's happening, and we actually had, one judge said, we want you to go over to Bridget Collins and get a parenting education class that focuses on nutrition. And it was like, we don't do that, but it's that kind of level of not really understanding what the resources are and how to determine what best works for the family that we're trying to correct here. And so what we have here, this model looks at is that the family and the system, whoever's intervening with the family, are really the first step of looking at kind of that relationship to determine why are we intervening, why are we in your life, and along with the provider. So that together, they're looking at this engagement and parenting skills, evidence-based practice, an assessment service. We need that assessment service of what's best for the family to happen outside of that initial family intervention piece. It needs to happen as a team, but it needs to be happening with the provider who actually has the ability to provide those particular services. And then once that happens, that provider can then create a evidence-based parenting skills building treatment package. How do we do this work? And again, you can see that that what happens and what results of that impacts and results in what we talk, what the system looks at serving. And you can see that, the kind of the continuum of what happens, that, the family and the system are at this intervention phase, the provider is really in charge of running the assessment phase, and then the delivery phase of those particular programs. But they all influence the rest of the program. When we talk about delivering the evidence-based practices as a part of an integrated treatment package, one of the common things around evidence-based practices is attrition. People dropping out is a huge problem. I mean, these are programs that were developed, in university settings. There's some control things, and even within those university settings, they had a lot of attrition. Well, for 25% of the people that stay with the program, it's great. It works wonderful. Or 50%. But for the others, it's like, well, who are they? Why aren't they still? It didn't work. So we take that pretty seriously, and we've been looking at our particular programs in terms of how do we increase those rates, and reduce attrition, increase. And I was talking earlier about the Incredible Years program and how we had 12 people signed up. And then within 4 sessions, it was down to 4. And here's where we get into trouble, because we don't get paid. When it's 4, the state says we won't pay you anymore, because that's not enough to make a credible program, and so you're gonna have to stop. So it's important for us to have good retention rates and things. So we're looking at that. But I asked, so I said, well, who were these people that went away, And here's the comment, here's was a lot of the clients, 4, never actually showed up or contacted us anyway. Then there was another woman who relapsed on drugs and could not continue coming. Then there were another 2 clients whose attendance has been sporadic, and the social workers state that those clients are not following through with any of their services. So no wonder these individuals aren't following through. So what we've been doing is looking at a variety of ways that we can improve that and make that work better. That's why I was saying that at the provider level, who are actually delivering the service, who are actually engaging the families, that's the critical place to determine what these packages are. Because obviously those 8 people that went away, this was not the right program for them. We missed something. So I just have 2 examples of how we're doing this and integrating these program models with other programs. One is internal. It's our PCIT home visitor program model. Again, part of this program model was developed with the support of our grant from the Commission on Children and Families and the old WIPCAN program. And then the other is a new program that we're working is we're calling it Pathways to Reunification, and it has come out of our work with the Table of 10 program. Tim Jasko, I don't think he's here right now, but his program with the Court Improvement program that we've been working on. I also want to say, that these are, when we do have model deviations, that it's really important that those model deviations, because these are like combining 2 different programs or 2 different services in a particular and structured, unique way. It needs to be planful. It needs to be thoughtful. You need to be working with the developers so that they know what you're doing and they have some different thoughts about how it might impact the actual delivery of the service. So that kind of a process. We actually some of these are like kind of really nuanced little changes that might happen. One we had it was a triple P client, and he was saying, well. You shouldn't, I don't need to do my homework on that because that was that class, and so, but we changed it. Well, we're not going to have you base your homework on a particular session, and it was more along the lines of, we're using chapter for the word. You still have to do your chapter homework, not your session homework, because he was coming back and using that language. So that's a little nuanced thing, but it was planful. We thought about it, we staffed it because we looked at the problem, and then we thought, well, we want to make sure we don't drift away and just start calling it, chapters all the time, because there might be something to this little the nuance on sessions, you know. So I just bring that as an example of the type of just attention to the detail in terms of how, you know, you deliver those services and make changes, because we do. You know, we do look at the models, and this PCIT home visitor model, I think this is where we really started getting quite excited about it, is that our PCIT graduation rate last year was 54%, which was a 21% increase over our previous graduation rate of 33%. Now, how did that happen, and why did it happen? And we did a really structured review of that. And again, we started looking at, these are the things that we did: an assessment of each family's readiness level, like I was talking to you before. It was conducted by the program coordinator. All our PCIT participants are assigned a Bridget Collins case manager, because what we did when we looked at the families that the attrition went away on, or where they left the program. And then we compared them with the ones that stayed in the program. And what we actually ended up finding was that those that were in the program had 7 or more contacts with our organization prior to starting PCIT. So we just said, well, you know, that was because they had, you know, been in some of our other programs. Well, we're just going to make that a mandatory part of all of our PCIT programs, that we have a case manager that's at least making 7 contacts. You know, phone calls, home visits, whatever it is, you know, with those families to, you know, because we have found that seems to be, you know, a critical piece. You know, we didn't know exactly what was going on in those 7, you know, contacts, but we did know that there was something to that. And what we came to find out is that it builds trust, a trusting relationship with the client. And then we also started saying we want to really focus the work of those case managers, and so we trained them all in MI. They're using this checklist of supports. So what we're also doing is the case managers, they have been oriented and they know what PCIT is doing. So when they go into the home, they're checking off and looking for the things that these families are supposed to be doing in their homework. You know, because the families have to go and do homework. And so we kind of, you know, pull all those types of things together. The other part is that we do a lot of outreach with our community partners, so that the ones that are making the referrals into the program are more aware of what these programs are. We have big breakfast, you know, for all of our children's administration referring social workers, and they came over and we oriented them to what the program was. We showed them what it was all about, and that seemed to make a big difference in terms of getting the right referrals in. And then, again, we have an organizational commitment to PCIT services and adhering to the model itself. The Pathway to Reunification program is related to, again, this Table of 10 project that I was talking about earlier, where it's a court improvement process, and there are 10 individuals that come into our county is one of 6 that are involved in this particular community planning project, and court commissioners there, the parent reps are there, the attorney general's there, the offices there, the GALs are there, service providers are there, and they're talking about how do you improve permanency rates in terms of the speed and time it takes for permanency to occur. And just having that conversation and going through a process to determine that. And out of that, I was asked to be a part of the Whatcom County one, and there's one in Skagit County as well, so I was asked to be a part of the one in Skagit County, and just listening. And it's very interesting because they came to the same conclusions, that we need to get involved with these families right away. You know, and so we started looking at how do we pull together some of these evidence-based practices, and what are we looking at. And so here's how we're kind of looking at this in the service focus and what to do with the families. You know, there's this intervention that happens with everybody, and this is where we're looking at our family treatment court as being kind of the focus of this particular project, and the family treatment court is where the systems intervenes. And that's there's a lot of evidence to show that of how important and how effective the family treatment court is. Then we look at parent engagement, because all these folks said, when the kids have been pulled out of the home and they come to their shelter care hearing at 72 hours, they're pissed off. They're angry. They don't want anything to do with anybody. They're resistive to services. And so engaging them is something that's very important. And I said, well, absolutely. So we probably need to do our best skills and look at what evidence-based practice is there that with the person that we're going to have intervene with them. And so we'll make sure that our person uses a good motivational interviewing skills in that work. The visit and the structure and the parent deficit identification. That's what I was talking about earlier, how important that is. You know, whenever they get there, the parent needs to know, why did you take my kid? The commissioner needs to know that too, and the social worker needs to know that. You need to identify that out. And so we were looking at, we looked at several different type of intervention models, and the Rosemarie Wentz model, planned, purposeful, and progressive parent-child visitation models, uses and has a lot of constructs and a lot of tools to help determine what that looks like, and what those specific parenting deficits are, and what you need to focus on. So we said, okay, let's bring that into the model here. And then the parenting skills interventions. You know, the early on parenting skills interventions that we might use would be levels 2 and 3 triple P in this particular program. And then the higher level interventions, we have these triple P levels 4 and 5 and PCIT in incredible years. So this is a model that we've been developing that's actually been embraced by both of those triple P programs. And the initial placement phase, staying connected with the child, you can see that you know, we do a phone call on day 1 with the child and the parent. These are things that are a part of the Wentz model. And then start the visits within 48 hours and use the motivational interviewing and triple P programs. The reasonable efforts phase of reunification happens. And that's a 1 to 2 month time period where we would be, again, continuing to use the levels 2, 3, 4, and 5 triple P, because those are the ones where reunification doesn't have to necessarily be imminent. And then the final permanency decision phase, when the child is about to be returned home, we would be looking at the triple P levels 4 and 5, PCIT, and incredible years programs as being fits. So you can see how this is kind of, you know, pulling together a variety of different models in terms of, you know, what's actually happening in the systems and how we're responding to the programs. So essentially that's kind of how we're applying and practicing these evidence-based practices in our organization, and kind of what's happening. We encourage anybody to participate. This PowerPoint's available to you. If you want to go to our website, you can, you know, get it on there. And then also just, you know, look at some of those tools that we're developing and give us feedback. Thank you all.